The most successful people in the world all have one thing in common. They've learned how to think big by developing a perspective of possibility. And the good news is, we all have the potential to apply the same strategies to achieve amazing things in our work and lives. Hi, I'm Rob Hartnett, and as your Chief Possibility Officer and host, I'm here to inspire you to become the star of your world as a person of possibility, through learning how people from all areas of life are thinking big and chasing down their dreams. Let's hear from a person of possibility right now. And today we're discussing what's possible for organisations who want to build a customer-focused culture. My special guest is a former work colleague of mine and now a multi-award-winning author, keynote speaker and CEO of Market Culture, Dr. Chris Brown. Welcome, Chris. How are you, my friend?
I'm great, Rob. It's great to be here. Great to chat with you today, mate.
I'm excited for us to get together at long last. It's been a long time. Just for those bit of background, Chris and I were in the HP ecosystem in the day, and then worked at HP together. And I guess one of the things we shared back then was and as I've read more of your book, which we'll talk about in a moment, I mean, you and I really did share that focus of customer centricity and being driven by customers. And as I reflected on some of the things we did at HP, and I'm reading the book and getting through it, I'm just it's all coming back to me, and everything you guys say is fantastic. But you're a doctor now, so tell me about that. But so you're a doctor. How did that happen? You've been living and working in Silicon Valley for a number of years. So maybe give us a little backstory between HP and where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. So, I think that really shaped my view of business, that experience at HP. So, that was very early in my career. And, both Bill and Dave Packard were incredible founders of that organization. And the time that we were there, I would describe it as being very customer centric, right? It was, it was an engineering mindset. There was great engineers. But what was interesting was that those engineers really cared about customers. They wanted to produce high value, great products. And so that really influenced me. And I kind of saw how that changed over time too, right? Where the balance between customer centricity and maybe short-term results kind of affected the culture there. And HP lost its way for a fair bit of time. I think it's regained itself a little bit in recent years. But so that kind of really intrigued me. And I thought, well, what's going on? Like, it's obvious, isn't it, that we need to be customer centric, but why do businesses lose that? And what happens there? So I was really curious about that question. And so I left HP. I was always interested in marketing, similar to you. I recall our time there, you being super creative and always coming up with these great, impactful campaigns and programs and standing out. And that was something that I was, really impressed by in terms of your work. And I'd always just enjoyed marketing, but I'm kind of a bit more analytical, I'm a bit more research based. And so I tend to kind of look at, what's the evidence for things. So I was always intrigued by that. And so, I left, I went to set up a business in the US, which was really about marketing strategy and how do businesses develop really good strategies. And as part of that experience, I kind of had this epiphany that, businesses can have great marketing strategies, great marketing people, but unless that's sort of a philosophical basis in the organization where it's valued and seen to be important at driving growth, then it's very hard to really be successful in those environments. And so that's when I looked at the culture piece and said, well, from a culture point of view, how does culture then influence, the organization? And big organizations are social animals, aren't they? And so, what I found was that really, if the leadership have this customer-centric mindset, then that then flows down through the organization. If they don't have that, then it's really hard to kind of create an environment where people want to deliver great experiences for customers, and that's really a priority for them. And so that's kind of where it came from. And then I saw, in Silicon Valley, a lot of the best companies in Silicon Valley are extremely customer centric, right? They've identified a problem that's worth solving, and they've just gone after it in a way with such tenacity and drive and passion that they've created something of tremendous value. And so I saw that sort of pattern of behavior, and I was curious about it, and that's kind of what led to the doctorate, to kind of interview leaders and find out more.
Yeah, and look, it is fantastic that pursuit, Chris, and I think I've become more analytical over the years as I've become, creative, but I've also looked for the evidence and, because when you're doing strategy, which strategy do you take?
Yeah,
And you've got to balance that sort of evidence with that possibility mindset of creativity of, I think it's Henry Ford says it well, the quote, which is, if I asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse
yeah,
versus,
yeah,
what they really need. And, if you look at even companies like Sony, I said we don't talk to customers that much about where they're going because they don't know where they're going, but we talk to customers so we can design things. And the thing
yeah,
is, sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't. But I
yeah,
think having that to me, it's always been so natural, and I think to you too, it's been so natural to have this customer focus. And I recall, you may not know this story, but before I joined HP, because I'd come from Apple, you see, and so we were obsessed. And before I joined HP, I knew what I was going to be doing there, and I just spent a couple of weeks just going around the channel, meeting people, and anyway, I just was doing this, and then I joined HP, and on the very first day I was there, John Bisky, you remember, who
yeah.
headed up, Australia and New Zealand, came over and saw me, and he goes, "So you're the guy that's been out there pestering our channel members." And he says, "I didn't know who it was." So I was just getting all this feedback. There was an HP guy here, and he's breathes a breath of fresh air, and he's challenging us our thinking, and he's asking what a customer's doing and asking what we need as channel members. And John said, "I didn't know who the hell it was. I was trying, couldn't find out who was out there. I was asking the team, but you hadn't started yet." And I realized who it was. And to me, that was just what you did. I mean, that's where our products were being sold, and it's certainly in emerging products, which I was looking after initially. Well, if you weren't close, we actually didn't know. You had to be as literally as close to the customer as literally, helping them unbox the first product and go, where are you plugging it in and what room do you plug it in, and
Yeah.
what are you using it for, and things like that. So to me, it was a very natural thing. But I think having that background at Apple, where we were very much customer obsessed and like HP,
Yeah.
engineering obsessed as well, in terms of let's design something that's really cool and really different, not just a short term solution to a need, but actually something that's quite elegant. I think
Yeah.
that's where I had that background.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a-
Now, you wrote the book, so the book's amazing, and I'm reading the book and a long way through it. Love every part of it. It's called The Customer Culture Imperative. So just talk to us about why you wrote the book,
yeah.
and why the name. I love the name, but I'd love to hear your story behind the name and why you felt the need to write the book.
Yeah. So it's a great question. I think, the idea of putting customers first is not a new idea, obviously. And it's a kind of a funny thing because most people, you don't get argued with about, oh yeah, put the customer first. Of course, of course. But, I think what we're describing in the book is very much a holistic approach to this. And when people hear the term customer first, they think about customer service, or they think about sales or marketing. They don't think holistically about really what that means. And this, the great idea I think came from Drucker, which is, it's to do with, customer experience is the whole business viewed by the point of view of the customer, right? That perspective. And that gets lost quite easily once you scale. So if you think about small business, it's kind of pretty easy. It's pretty direct. We're face to face. I know that I need to make sure this customer's happy, otherwise they're not going to come back, and so on. But as you scale
But
business,
Chris, can I just talk to you about that? Because
yeah,
I'll tell you what I think, and you're on the right path. We'll keep going on this. But you know
yeah,
what? This book, and for anyone who hasn't read it yet, I encourage you to get it. This book to me is not a marketing book. This is a leadership book.
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that's where you're going because,
yeah,
culture comes from leaders leading from the front. And I read this, and everywhere I'm reading this, and the great thing about it is you've got so many quotes from some amazing leaders you people recognize, but it's actually leadership. This is a leadership book. And I would hate to see a leader or a business owner, small or large, walk past the bookshop and go, "Oh, customer culture imperative. Yeah, I'll get that from my marketing team." No, you buy the freaking thing for yourself, right?
yes, yeah,
Because I've seen a lot of small business owners who actually are not customer centric.
yeah, yeah.
I grew up with one. He was called my father, right? And in all honesty, my father and he's very common in terms of he's a technician, he's a
Yep,
motor engineer, He loved working on cars. He could not stand customers. He didn't
Yes.
want to talk to customers. And that's why
Yeah.
I was brought into the business when I was 5 years old, right? And I remember him going to me when I was 8 or 9, can you go and see that customer and see what he wants? Because my dad was far more, interested on his lathe, making sure the car would get an extra 10 horsepower out for a race meet that weekend. You know
Yes.
what I mean? And so there are
Yeah.
a lot of business owners who actually don't understand
Yeah.
that it's
Yeah.
important for customers, even small. And as they scale, it gets even worse, right?
Yes.
Because they don't hire for customer culture, then and they build up a business that sometimes is very technically great, but obviously doesn't scale that well and doesn't last very long because
Yeah.
the term gets around. Now he was very lucky that my mother was quite customer centric, and clearly I was very customer centric. But he was as the business owner and leader, and he employed staff. That was certainly not his first love.
Yeah. Yeah.
He would always do exceptional work. And that's why people came back, because his workmanship was fantastic. In
Yes.
terms of customer centricity, that was probably the second reason they came back.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just
Yeah.
want to pick you up on that because I do think that it's in small business too. I think this book and what you're doing is
Yeah.
just as important.
It's a great point, Rob. I mean, I think it's a little bit what you've triggered a thought there of the soup Nazi in Seinfeld, right?
Exactly.
Who,
Nice.
part of the value proposition there probably is that you get treated poorly, but you got this incredible product, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but so sometimes you can get away with it because the product's so good that customers will put up with some, bad experiences and still continue the
Mhm.
relationship. But that's pretty rare, right? That's
It's
not
rare.
a normal
But those
situation.
people, and I'm thinking most French restaurants, but that's their way of being customer centric as well. And so my father's way of being customer centric was to go above and beyond in what he did to keep on to tune that car to the nth degree. Even if you drove a Corolla in there, and all due
Yeah,
respect to Toyota owners, but if you
yeah,
drove a Corolla in there, it didn't matter whether you drove a Corolla or a Jaguar XJ6, he would service that car to exactly the same standard.
yes.
And that was his way of expressing customer centricity.
So this is a great point, Rob, because I think there are different ways to express it, right? I think
Mm,
you and I are probably fairly similar in that we think about it as the relational side, right? The relationship, maintaining good relations and those sorts of things. But the other side of it is also, embedding excellence and value in a product, in a service. And I often use Amazon as a great example of customer centricity. And people sometimes get a bit confused because they're like, well, I've never spoken to anyone at Amazon. I've never really dealt with anyone there. But actually what they've embedded is this methodology, right, of customer centricity that really enables a customer to get this incredible experience, this frictionless experience. Now, it's not one that we have a relationship with, but it's one that delivers value for us. We get the product overnight. I can order your book on Amazon. I can get it tomorrow. I can return it quite easily if I need to, all of those sorts of things. So there's sort of two styles of customer centricity. It's relational in certain businesses where that's an important part of the offering.
yes.
And then it's also, but the customer-centric thinking can get embedded in process
Yeah.
and all of that as well. And so
Yes.
it's a different way of doing
It,
the
it,
same
it
thing.
totally is, isn't it? Because that becomes, and that's why I love this fact about the culture, because it becomes the brand. The brand. You think of Amazon, you think of customer centricity. You don't think of Jeff
Yep.
Bezos terribly much, or
Yep.
that type of thing. I remember early days of Amazon days. If I recall this right, I remember. You probably remember Monica Lovegren, who used to be at
Yes.
HP together. I remember Monica saying, and she's very customer focused, right? She goes, "Oh God, I love this. I love this Amazon. This is fantastic." She's going, "I'll talk about the service she's getting." And I said to her, "You do realize you're falling in love with an Intel server, right?" And so,
Yeah.
but no, we joked about that. But the point was that they had got it to a point where she was in, like most of us now, with Amazon, we love we love, we connect with that brand. We know the brand gets us. And we're not
Yeah.
thinking about a person to speak, but we are thinking about this entity called Amazon, which we know is
Yeah.
customer centricity. And they've kind of what we call crossed the chasm in many ways, about moving it from a personal, I trust
Yeah.
a person, I trust Chris Brown to do something, or Rob Hartnett, versus I trust this brand, which is
Yeah.
only done by culture.
Yes, exactly right. And I think a great example of that with them is, this idea if I go to purchase something I've already purchased, it kind of gives you a bit of a red flag to say, you actually already bought that. Are you sure you want to buy it again?
Yes.
And so like a business that's not very customer centric would just go, look, we'll grab that business.
Yes.
Whatever
Yes.
business is coming, we'll take it. But they're actually saying, look, we care about you and the fact that you make the right decision. We don't want you buying something you've already bought by mistake.
Yeah.
And the thing about it that's really clever, right, is the decision making is one that's right for the customer. So it saves me from buying something I shouldn't have, but also saves Amazon, because ultimately, if I'm unhappy, I'm going to return the book back to them
Yeah.
and there's a cost.
That's
Right?
cost. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I
Yeah.
think that's, they do that in many different ways. It's really clever the way that they've embedded that way of thinking in their business, and it's fundamentally cultural across their organization.
Yeah, now as you go through the book and you end up coming up with this MRI, which we'll talk about in a second, but you talk about there was originally, I think, in the book sort of 9 strategic levers you had, and they got it down to 7, if I'm right on that one. There was 7
Yeah.
levers you have now. Of the 7, is there a couple that stand out that I mean, I know they're all important, but is there a
Yeah.
couple that for you that really stand out where people either get it
Yep.
right or don't get it wrong, or they have the biggest swing?
Yeah. Look, I think that there's kind of probably 3 of those that really stand out, and in fact, maybe 4. But customer insight is this concept of really understanding your existing customers. So really getting a deep knowledge of who are my existing customers, what drives value for them, and how do we continue to do that. So if we take the Amazon example, it's quite an easy one that everyone can relate to. But if we think about Amazon, they're sort of driving against some core customer needs that don't change really over time, right? So we want things really fast. So they're always trying to optimize the speed of delivery and different ways to do that. We want that, and that's going to always be the case. We want things that are relatively low cost, right? So we want a good price on them. So they're always driving prices down as much as possible. And then we want this huge range of offerings, right? We want to be able to buy anything we want, right? And so they're always driving against those core needs. And that's really a fundamental understanding across their business. They have really strong customer insight.
Yeah.
And not all businesses have that, right? They're not really clear on what are we driving against? What are we optimizing against? How are we delivering value? So I think that's one that's a big lever. It's a big discipline. And often there's a lot of value to be added by just focusing on that one discipline out of
That's a great discipline. That's my favorite as well, Chris. So I was glad you sort of came up. To me, that's a really big one. But there was also an interesting case study in the book as well, which I thought was really neat. In that one of the things that one of the areas that 2 areas lifted. One, this company went from 12 months ago to now. One of the things that changed was they become a lot more customer focused about insights. They were delivering a lot more insights across the organization. But one of the other things that lifted was clarity of strategy, right?
Yes.
And I thought, gee, aren't those two intertwined? Because people
Yeah.
aren't stupid. People
Yeah.
aren't naturally dumb. And I think for most people, I'm an optimist, but most people do care about customers. But
Yeah.
if they don't know what they're looking for and they don't know it's a business imperative, it just
Yeah.
doesn't rise to the top. But if you
Yeah.
tell them it's an imperative,
Yes.
they'll listen more, they'll tune
Yeah.
in more, and therefore you'll get more insight. And I thought it was really interesting when the customer communication strategy lifted. So in other words, the leadership said, "Hey, this is really what we're doing," and they repeated that and repeated it on and on and on. Lo and behold, the insights came in more and more.
Yes.
Have you
Yeah.
seen that? I mean, you've got one good case study in there, I think, on it. But
Yeah. Yeah. Look, absolutely. I mean, and a lot of this, what we find, there are very strong elements of customer culture, but it's kind of unevenly distributed across
sort
the
of
business.
patchy, isn't it?
Yeah. And so you
Yeah.
can have centers that are great, but they're not necessarily, it's not across the business. It's not part of the business. It's not part of the fabric and the DNA.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it needs to be elevated to the leadership level, because they're really responsible for creating that dialogue, that conversation, prioritization, what's important, whatever they're communicating to people in the business is what people think's important.
Yeah.
So if they're only talking about safety, for instance, right? And that's really important in certain businesses, then safety becomes the number one factor. Or if they're really just talking about risk management and protecting, which we see a lot in the banks,
Yeah.
then what happens at the teller level is they're trying to protect the
Yes.
bank from customers,
Yeah.
right? And so what sort of result does that have for customers, right? We don't have a great experience with the banks because they're in protection mode, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. That's why if you walk into a major bank, the first guy you meet or first guy or girl you meet is usually a security guard with a handgun. It's not exactly
Yeah.
customer centricity.
No, that's
Um,
right. That's right.
but that's a good interesting point you made. And I'm just going to hark people back. If you haven't listened to the podcast with Mark Fulcher earlier this year, Mark's a ex-Aussie Post guy when John Stanhope was there. But Mark is now running a leadership practice helping medium-sized business owners to scale. And
Okay.
that's actually what he does. Is one of the things he's doing. It's a nice link to this, is because he's helping these mid-sized business owners who need to maybe look at appointing a CEO now or appointing a C-suite they never had before. He's
Yep.
helping them say, hey, what is your purpose? How do
Yep.
you communicate the purpose? How do you communicate this customer centricity that you have as a business owner and leader? How do you now filter this through? And he often gets pushback. If you listen to the podcast, he gets pushback by people saying, oh, stop bringing your big corporate world here, Mark, But he's saying, but that's how you get to it, right?
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
sometimes and he actually struggles to really get them to turn the corner. When they do, they get it. But he
Yeah.
says oftentimes they don't understand that a lot of it is in that comm space to realize what the imperatives all are and not just get into our silos that we
Yes.
all have. As you said, safety is super important.
Yeah.
But how can we do that with a lens of customer centricity?
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
No,
so we've got customer insight. What were a couple of the other ones that would be?
yeah. So, I mean, you've touched on strategic alignment, right?
Yep,
Which is
strategic
really
alignment.
that,
Yep.
yeah, that idea that we're going in the same direction. I think the other big one is cross-functional collaboration. So, it's something that businesses talk a lot about and say, we're collaborative and so on. But it does take great leadership to bring teams together across functions,
Yes.
because each function, as we know, right, attracts different types of people, right? And those different personalities and different styles. And I know you've done a lot of work in this area with
Mm.
DISC and those tools over the years. But people are very different, and the ability for leaders to bring them together and to really value those differences, right? I think
Yeah.
that's what great leaders do, is they're able to help people understand that, yeah, look, these guys in sales think a bit differently to you guys in engineering. And here's why they think differently. Here's the result of that difference in thinking, and this is how they add value. And helping sort of bridge those divides across functions. And
Yes.
when you see it work and people really kind of can see the value of the other function, then you really can see a lot better, more productive working relationships together. And, I know it's quite idealistic, right? But it certainly is possible, and I've seen it work. And a lot of that comes down to giving people the opportunity to engage with each other and creating those environments, right? And that's where leadership plays a role. If they don't create the opportunity for it, then it doesn't happen. But that's super powerful. And then the last one is a new discipline we added since the book, actually, which is empowerment.
Yes.
So there's actually 8 disciplines in our model now.
Yeah.
So originally we had that sort of, it was in our sort of structural equation model, which is the way in which we sort of analysed how the behaviours relate to business outcomes. That didn't quite make the bar for us in terms of driver of business performance.
Right.
But things have changed over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because of
Right.
dynamics now, what we're seeing is that the ability to empower people to make decisions that are right for customers, that's super important, particularly as the dynamics of markets are faster and the change that we're seeing. We've got AI now. We've got a whole bunch of different things that are happening that didn't have back then. And that's requiring leaders to really empower people more effectively, to be adaptable and agile. And if they don't feel like they can do it, they're not going to do it.
I think that's right. And that whole thing we talk about IQ and EQ, but AQ, which is the agility quotient,
Yeah.
is always been important. In fact, people often say to me, in the days when I was at HP with the HP PC business, one of the key things we did was actually empower the sales team.
Yeah.
And you're right about the silos, because what we'd done, we'd hired great people, hired amazing people in the sales team, had great sales leadership, had great sales management, but we hadn't empowered them. We made them jump through all these hoops to get a
Yeah.
big deal discount. And one of the
Yeah.
things I did was get a sign off locally to say, hey guys, all the sales guys, you can just cut a discount up to X amount of level
Yeah.
on the spot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they were so thrilled. And I said to them, you can cut it on the spot, but I'll audit it. And I'll
Yeah.
audit it every 3 months. And anyone who goes over it, I'll fire you. Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's rules.
Yeah.
Let's be fair about this.
Yeah.
And you know, Chris, I analyzed it after I audited it after 12 months.
Yeah.
No one got within, they basically gave away a third of what they could have in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
percentage discount because it was
Yes.
not in their interest, and they were great people and they were loyal to the business. I mean, there was no interest in doing it, and none of them got anywhere near it. All they wanted was to feel empowered that when they're on the spot and someone says IBM's at this price, Compact's at that price, Dex at this price, they just want to go, yeah, we can do that, or
Yes.
yeah, I can get it there. Like they just felt, and it was just a game change. And I remember some of the sales team coming back to me going, you know, my life's changed. It wasn't like they had a
Yeah.
salary increase or anything like that. It was, but with the empowerment they had, they felt more confident to be able to
Yeah.
go to places they couldn't go. And I think that empowerment side is, especially now, and I was going to ask you, was there any changes, since 2015, you've touched on one, but
Yeah.
has there been any change? I'd be interested to know, has there been any changes through the pandemic? Has that affected anything in this area of customer centricity from your point of view?
Yeah, look, I think what it exposed, if you look at some data, I'm just I don't have it to mind immediately, but I do know that there was some studies that were done around customer experience, right,
Mm,
during that period, and it actually went backwards fairly significantly for a lot of businesses.
mm,
And it sort of reflects this. I mean, it was a major disruption, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah.
I know, for us, we were used to doing in person. I know you would have been the
Yes.
same with
Yeah,
your
for
work.
sure.
And then you've got to shift online, right? And you've got to translate everything that you do, all the value you do, and do it online. So it's a big disruption. And some businesses did that really, really well. They were really, ready for it and ready to go. And obviously the IT and technology businesses had an advantage there because many of them have been operating that way for a long time. But I think a lot of the businesses sort of in the middle really struggled with that. And as a result, they sort of weren't able to really step up when their customers really needed them. So I think that was a big wake-up call for many businesses,
Right.
I think, to kind of say, well, actually, a lot of our systems aren't adaptable and agile enough, and we were really caught out. And look, I mean, no one saw it coming, right? But it was
No,
certainly an
no.
impact on the agility
Yeah, and
factor.
I think the other factor is, as I'm listening to you talk about that, one of the things that I was more at the front of was the impact on leadership,
Yeah.
and those who weren't necessarily leading but more managing,
Yes.
and managing by command and control, and managing by walking around the office and looking over people's shoulders. They
Yep.
were completely at sea when you're working from
Yes.
home, and so
Yeah.
they either did two things: they either went AWOL, no one knew where the hell they were going,
Yeah.
or they overdid it and were, checking if your mouse was moving. In fact, you might have known that one of the great sellers on Amazon during that period was this the little device you get that would make sure your mouse was moving around the screen when you were doing other things. Yeah, just so your boss could go, oh, right, the IT department were going, okay, no, they're flat out at work, and it was just like ticking
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
So it went two ways. When people realized, I did a lot of work with leaders, and a lot of things they said was, oh, we don't want to talk to our people until we've got all the answers. And I'm
Yeah.
like, as a leader, I feel I've got to have the answers. And I'm like, no, as a leader, you got to show vulnerability. You want to
Yeah.
get on this and go, hey, given what I know now, this is what we're doing, but this could change next week. Given what I know
Yeah.
now, I'm not
Yeah.
sure where this is going. Given the evidence, the research that we've made a decision, we're going to go over here. They actually
Yeah.
need to hear from you. And it was,
Yep.
I think we jumped a real leap ahead during that time period in terms of, I think for most leaders, they jumped ahead to think that they actually can be honest and can be vulnerable,
Yeah.
and they don't have to have all the answers. That's a great leader, a great leader
Yeah.
doesn't have all the answers, but they go and
Yeah.
find them. They get their team
Yes.
together, they empower, and they go and find them. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's definitely the case. I just want to I'm going to get a question without notice here. What do you think? So at the moment, one of the things you've probably seen this as well, but when you go around retail, especially from Coles or from I was flying with Qantas last week, Coles, Woolworths, a lot of the big retailers, for
Mm.
almost every one of them has this thing about, hey, treat our staff with respect. Can you
Mm.
just and getting angry, yelling is not a great thing. Um, how do you maintain a customer centric culture when you have a consumer base which is quite angry at times for a whole bunch of reasons? What's the
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, look, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's really difficult, right? Because, um, look, no one wants to go to work and get abused, do they? No one wants to
No.
be in an environment where, you're doing your best, and, someone's had a bad day, they're under stress, they're under pressure in their own life, and you cop it, right? So, I mean, again, it's a real test of leadership, right? So how are you helping your people navigate the inevitable um, negativity that's been, around during that period, right? People during COVID, and certainly in the US, I was in California for most of the time, but it was a heightened state of anxiety and stress just in general.
Right.
And everyone was feeling it. And so people's fuses were a lot shorter. Things were triggering, and people were responding and behaving badly,
Yeah.
essentially. I think what a test of leadership, right, is how do you talk to your team? How do you talk to your people about being able to deal with those things? And I know a lot of the work that you've done in the personal development and leadership space is helpful. The positive psychology side of things, right? How do you reframe what's going on in the environment? How do you
Yeah.
think differently about what's happening, and why it's happening, and don't have it personally, take it personally,
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
it part of, don't take it on, right? And I think it's kind of easy to say, but there's a bit of practice that's involved, and there's
Sure
some
is.
coaching and support that you need from leaders to be able to deal with those things, right?
Yeah.
So, I think it's certainly been very challenging for those businesses that have been in that environment. I've got an uncle that works in that environment, um, and it was interesting. I think he was fortunate in that he felt actually very good and secure that they were actually seen to be really needed, right? That we were recognizing who's the most important people in these times, right? It's the
Yeah.
guys that run the infrastructure that we live in, right, and that we
Yeah.
all rely on. And so his experience, he had some bad experiences, but he also had some positive ones through that.
Yes.
I think he had great leadership in his organization to help them sort of navigate that.
It's a really good point, and let's swing around to leadership more. We touched on it, but I really want to focus on it a bit more now because I do think, as I said, I think this is a great leadership book. One of the interesting examples I saw, you talked about the cross-functional side, and I thought that was a really great point. I remember reading about a guy called Bill Campbell. I'm sure you came across Bill Campbell. He was through, very big Silicon Valley guy,
Yeah,
and he was at Apple. He ran Claris, their software division, for a while, and became then a coach to the guys at Google, and they call him a billion-dollar coach.
yeah,
And one of the things that Bill Campbell did was, if he ever had the sales team at Apple go down to the research team and the research team and the engineers and go, "Hey, look, I've just been out with customers, and this is what their problem is, and what they think can fix it is this," right?
mm,
And he'd grab hold of the salesperson who did that, and he'd take them aside, and he said, "I love the fact that you're talking to customers. I love the fact more that you're listening to customers,
mm,
but do not ever, ever go to the engineers and tell them what the solution is,
mm.
because
Yeah,
they think differently than you."
mm,
He said, "Tell them what the customer's problem is. Tell them what the customer's facing into. If it's a big enough problem, connect the two of them together by all means, but
mm,
leave them with the problem,
mm.
because they will come up with a solution that you or I would not have thought about."
Yes,
And I
yes,
thought it was such great advice and done in such a nice way to go, they're just different. You're
yeah,
different. I'm different. We think differently. And what they will take on board what that problem is and come up, as Henry Ford did, not with a faster horse, but with
yeah,
something completely different that was, change the world.
yeah,
I just thought that was, and that's leadership.
yeah,
That's someone like Bill Campbell, who's incredibly busy running a, billion-dollar empire. It's still
mm,
taking the time out to talk to sales teams and go, "Hey, I heard this. Thanks for going down there. Thanks for listening to customers. But guess what? This is what I'd really like you to do next time." And I
super
just think that's,
insightful.
isn't it insightful to do
Yeah, yeah,
that? He took the time, saw so much value that was worth taking the time to explain that to a new
yeah,
sales team
yeah.
member.
And I think, I think some of these things, they're not they're not intuitive, right? So I think that often, the stereotype of leaders is solving all the problems, isn't it? And the smartest guy in the room, and
Yep.
he's got all the answers. And that's been certainly, the history of much leadership sort of been portrayed that way. And the reality of leadership in terms of that's really effective leadership, is what he's described there, is thinking about not trying to solve the problem that the engineer can solve, but giving them some evidence of what customers are saying and what they're frustrated with, and how they're struggling, and then help and allowing them to do their jobs really.
Yes.
Right, which is what they get energy from, right, which is coming up with a solution that is going to solve the problem. So yeah, it's a great example.
So I had this question for you, which is like, and why is it so unnatural for so many leaders to be customer centric? Because some just
Yeah,
aren't. They're just
yeah, yep,
that's someone else. That's the other department, right? They're just
yep,
what?
yeah,
Have
that's
you had
right.
any insights into why some people just don't get it?
Yeah, look, I think that's a fascinating question. I think I think we kind of live on there's some of these things that there's a bit of a spectrum, right? From, when we're born, we're very self-centered, we're very focused on, survival and what's good for us. And I think as we mature and get older and develop and have more experiences, I think that what my experience has been is I've seen empathy develop over time in people.
Right.
And I think that empathy develops at different rates based on, some natural factors, and, you've got a natural propensity for it, but also experiences that you have, and certainly experiences of maybe understanding someone else and understanding customers in this instance better. And as a result of doing that, having some success yourself.
Yeah.
And so, part of the doctorate was interviewing a little over 60 leaders, and these were mainly CEOs of businesses, small businesses to really large ones. And what was common in their sort of early experiences was they did jobs that directly interfaced with a customer. So that
Really?
it might have
Right.
been like delivering newspapers.
Yes.
But what they figured out was, if they actually, instead of just chuck the newspaper on the lawn, they actually went up and delivered it, rang the doorbell and delivered it to them, they could actually sell some other stuff to them. So they were quite entrepreneurial types of characters.
Right.
Right? So they kind of figured out that if I added a little bit more value, rather than just chuck it on the lawn, but actually deliver it to the front door, I'll have a chance to have a chat with them, and maybe I've got some other magazines and things that I could sell to them.
Chris, can I just stop one second? This is fascinating because I've just come back from a week in Bangkok working with some, I would say, really customer-centric leaders in B2B. But two of them, we asked them what their very first paying job was, just as an icebreaker. And two of these leaders were ex-paper boys.
Well, hey, yeah,
Classic. I just had to tell you that. It was just so
yeah,
funny.
yeah. So I think David Thodey, who's was the
Yes.
former CEO of Telstra. So David was saying that his one of his early jobs was actually as a doorman at a
Wow.
hotel,
Right.
and part of his job was actually to get the bags onto the bus, and to sort of make sure that the people that were going to the airport got to where they needed to go, and so he had a lot of interactions with travelers that were coming to this hotel, and he said that really shaped his experience of being able to deliver value, getting some feedback from the customer that they enjoyed that experience and had that that relationship develop, and so on. And then there were others that were in retail environments where they saw that if they delivered, a good experience to the customer, that they would come back more regularly
Right.
than those that maybe they sort of didn't engage with.
Yeah.
So they sort of had these feedback loops that sort of suggested that, look, if I go above and beyond here, if I do something a little bit value adding, then actually that customer kind of enjoys that, and then repeats the experience, and I get some success from it as well, because I'm then promoted, and so on. And so that was the sort of pattern that I saw. And then also, they'd seen that maybe with others. So they'd seen maybe in your instance, you had a father that ran a business, and you saw some of the things that he did really well, and then some of the things that he could improve on, right?
Yeah, he
So you
outsourced to
saw,
me.
yeah. So you saw the opportunity, right?
Yeah,
And I think so. I think those early experiences really shape people,
really.
and then some of
Yeah,
those experiences happen later in their career, right? They
right.
happen when they move to a company maybe that's very customer centric, like an
Yeah,
Apple or
yeah.
an Amazon.
Yeah, and they're thrown in the deep end or given a project. There was a few of those there that, someone who
Yeah,
stepped in. And
yeah,
I think that's because I do find it really interesting, those examples you give with, it's Richard Branson with Virgin, it's David Thodey with Telstra, it's John Stanhope and a number of organisations he's worked with, Gail Kelly at Westpac. And you
yeah,
think back about that, and especially reflecting on the Gail Kelly era, because that when Westpac was so customer centric, and you get that, it's so leader driven, isn't it? It's so important that this, and
yep,
those leaders really, really wear it on their sleeve. Like they actually, it's not
yep,
a tick box, which I see too much of. As you said, I think you see customer centricity. Oh, we're all into that. And it's a
yep,
tick box, or we, as someone said, yeah, we're having a keynote at an offsite, so that's ticked off out of the way. That's not what we're talking
yep.
about here.
No,
So I do think it is so much leader driven, even, but it doesn't have to be the global CEO. As you said, it can be, you can be a mid-level leader and still
yep,
drive customer centricity as far as you
yep,
can. I mean, obviously
yep.
there's a salary problem or a gap where you can go, but you can still be incredibly influential, even as a
Yes.
mid-level leader.
Yeah, look, absolutely, Rob. I think that's what's fascinating, and that's been our experience too. We've found, we did some work with Deutsche Telekom in Germany
Right,
during the
right.
pandemic,
Yeah.
and originally the work was all going to be in person. And Deutsche Telekom's, a traditional Telstra type organization,
Just German.
just German, yeah,
Yeah.
and even more sort of
Yes.
rigid is what I
Yep.
would describe
Yeah.
the
That's what I was getting at.
organization
Yeah.
as. Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, we had two of the engineering teams as part of this program.
Right.
And these two teams didn't like each other, didn't communicate, weren't really interested in what the other groups were doing, really didn't have a great opinion of each other. And we had this courageous leader, Beatrix, who is, really a transformational type leader that really
Right.
wanted to improve how they were showing up for their end customers. So these technical teams were responsible for provisioning services to these large customers like Cisco's WebEx, right, and those sorts of customers. And they had to provision this technology. It was very, very technical work that they did. But she was able to bring these teams together, and we helped them facilitate, some change around, their customer centricity, but really get them to dialogue what it is that they were doing and how they could improve it, and really get them engaged in the process of doing that. And that created significant change for them in groups that I was really, concerned about, because I thought, we've done a lot of projects where we've got a lot more momentum. We've got a lot more people that already think in a customer-centric way, and we're kind of trying to bring everyone along that way. Whereas in these groups, I'd say, we had less than 10% of people that thought
Wow.
that way, right? So it
Wow.
was really an up
Yeah.
against it sort of challenge.
Yes.
For instance, when we did these online sessions, no one would put their video on. So I had
Oh,
160 blank
so hard.
screens on the
So
screen.
hard. I feel for you.
Yeah, so we had to really think hard about how to design the interventions and how to design the group work, and Beatrix was an incredible leader because she really was so consistent and so driven and communicated. We ran with them for about 18 months, and they created significant change. People felt differently about the work that they were doing there, and that showed through ultimately in how customers were experiencing the work of Deutsche
Right.
Telekom. So for them, it resulted in more business, right? So essentially, more of the provisioning work went to them than would have gone to them, because they were now viewed as being a solution that was much easier to deal with, right? Rather than the sort of rigid bureaucracy that had built up over time, where everything was too hard to do for a
Right.
customer, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it's possible, but it does take leaders, and this was a mid-level leader
Yes. That really
and
stood
she's
up.
now running a division, right? So she's
Wow.
now
There you go.
elevated her, yeah, she's now elevated her career because of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great story in a very tough environment, because I can only just imagine, having
Yeah.
worked with some German companies, just the way they are, their culture is what it is. But
Mm.
her steely determination to say, "Hey, we can do this, we can be better,"
Yeah. Yeah.
was something that brought them together. Now, tell me about the MRI. So you've now moved with the business. You've been doing a lot of consulting and a lot of one-on-one with
Yeah.
these large organisations, but you saw obviously a need to scale this, because it is an imperative, which I love.
Yeah.
So you designed the MRI. Take us through what the MRI is.
Yeah, yeah. So the MRI stands for the Market Responsiveness Index, and a nice way of thinking about it, it's like an MRI for your business, right? So it's taking a look inside your business,
Yeah.
and it's really uncovering your level of customer-centric behavior across the organization. And so it's an online assessment tool that essentially we deploy. We just send out. It's as simple as an email message that goes to employees. They then have a series of behavioral questions that they respond to. And then we get some benchmarks from that. So we can kind of see, well, where are we versus some of the best companies in the world on these different disciplines that we've identified? And more importantly, there's some open-ended feedback that we get from that. And that's, what are the things that are stopping us really being
Right.
customer-centric? Because a lot of the work of leaders is just take away some of these inhibitors. How can we
Yes.
remove some of the barriers to being customer-centric?
Yeah.
And so that's really valuable feedback. And that's really where the actionable meat comes from, right?
Right.
Is, here are the things that are stopping us
Mm.
doing the right thing for customers.
And I
And
like, they're anonymous too. I think the feedback, if I'm
yeah,
right, the feedback that you get from people, that the sort of
yeah,
anecdotal comments, the ad hoc, the kind of verbatims,
yeah.
they're actually anonymous, aren't they?
They are. And that's super important, right?
Yes, very
Because
important.
most people don't want to rock the boat. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the work that we do, unfortunately, there's a lot of risk associated with it in people's minds, right? I
Mm.
mean, this is people's jobs, their careers. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to put their jobs at risk.
Yeah.
And that's understandable, right? That's the environment that they're in. And so what that means is you don't get the truth as a leader often, right? You
Mm.
don't really find out what's happening.
Right.
And you'll just get told what they think you want to hear.
Yeah.
The MRI gives you an opportunity to really hear the truth. And so you've got to have, as a leader, you've got to have some resilience to say, I want to hear the truth. I'm
Yes.
willing to step on the scale and see what weight I'm at, whether
Yeah.
I'm at the right weight or not. And so, the leaders that take this on are real change makers. They're leaders that want to drive transformation, that
Mm.
want to create positive change, that are abundant minded, that are,
Yeah.
focused on growth. But this is a tool for them. So this is
Yes.
a tool that helps them really get to the truth, understand what are the behaviors that I want to now foster.
Yeah.
That's what the benchmark gives me. It says, look, I'm a little bit low in customer insight. Okay, what can we do to enhance that? And there's simple things that can be done, right? So one of the key bits of advice that we always give is, why not create change by having customers on the agenda of your leadership meetings?
Mm.
You just need the customer on the
Right.
agenda, right? To
Yeah.
say, look, yes, we've got financials. Yes, we've got our people. Yes, we've got processes. We've got the major projects we're doing, how we're looking for the quarter. All of that stuff's important. But where are customers on that agenda? And if customers are not on it, or they're at the end of that agenda, usually you don't get to it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's,
It
the
says a
best
lot, doesn't it?
companies, yeah, the best companies have it first, right? They start
Yes.
with,
Yeah.
so they start with, what's the customer environment looking like? How are we delivering for customers? What are the new opportunities? All of that sort of stuff. And, that's normal in a sales environment to
Right.
do. But across the business, can we do that? In finance, how are we affecting customers with our processes at the moment?
Yeah.
I had a client that was talking about a mistake that they made. And this was, being vulnerable, speaking about
Right.
being vulnerable. They shared this with me. They said, look, we actually changed our bank details recently and we didn't tell anyone.
Right.
So,
Small thing.
we stuffed up, and
Yeah.
customers were not happy about it, right? It created chaos.
Yes.
So, we owned it, we stepped up, we sort of tried to make amends from it. But, we had a moment where we weren't very customer centric. We weren't
Yeah.
thinking about the implications of this. And what I'd reminded them of is the importance of doing that, right? And thinking
Mm.
proactively about changes that you might be making, whether it's in billing or finance,
Yeah.
whether it's in legal, whether it's in IT, and what's the impact on customers? It's just
It's a great
that
question, isn't
reminder,
it?
right?
It's almost, you know, I remember at Tesco, you having that kind of banner in a lot of their meeting rooms in the UK at their head
Yep.
office, which was, it was something read, it was something like this: yes, but how does it affect customers? So
Yeah.
every time they came up with an internal thing to be more efficient, more process orientated, more something internal,
Yep.
before you walked out the doors, is yes, but how does this affect customers? Because if it's negative, rethink it. If it's
Yeah.
positive, go harder, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But just because we do get into that funk, we are responsible, and sometimes incentive plans drive you that way. But
Yeah.
you know, you've got to be thinking. And one of the things I say to sales leaders these days, I say good sales leaders, you know, lead sales teams. Great
Yep.
sales leaders lead selling across the organization. And really, what I'm
Yes.
saying is they're leading customer centricity. So
Yeah.
Mr. Head of Legal, Mr. CFO, Mr. CMO, what are we doing for customers this week? So it's not just the department, it's actually
Yeah.
leading that kind of culture
Absolutely.
change.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen that. I've seen that in organizations where they genuinely they take the company view, right?
Yeah.
And that's a rare thing. They're taking a company view, not just
Mm.
a sales view.
Yeah.
They're taking a company view, and they want to bring everyone along for the ride.
Yeah.
And that's a big, I mean, those people are outstanding leaders, aren't they?
Yes.
They're not
Yeah.
just sales leaders, but they're outstanding leaders.
Yeah.
And you know, in many instances, they become CEOs, right? Those people, because of that capacity to do that, to bring everyone along on the journey.
Mm.
And look, I think the other thing that I have to say about it is it's not, I don't think it's necessarily, you know, to some of us, it might be intuitive, but it's not necessarily that easy. I mean, it's easy to make mistakes, right? It's easy to fall back and get focused on process and things like that. And I'm guilty of that. I've had many examples where I've not been as customer centric as I
Right.
could be, right? So I don't want to sort of make light of it that this is easy stuff, that you know, everyone can do it and it's
But
easy.
it's
It doesn't
actually a
take a little
skill,
bit of
isn't it? I think that's our
it
thing
is.
too. It's intuitive. It's more intuitive to some people than others. And I think the background side is really a strong point you made earlier. But
Yeah.
it's also a skill we can learn. And then like
Yep.
anything, if you take a growth mindset to it,
Yep.
and think back about where I could have been more customer centric or when I was customer centric, and how can I get more of that and less of the other, and how do
Yeah.
I lead that in my people? That's
Yep.
a skill, and you know, it's like muscle. As soon as you start using it more and more and more, and I
Yep.
think the simple things you talk about, you know, I think that's really important. Just that adding customers to the agenda, adding
Yep.
customer insight to the agenda where we didn't have it beforehand. Maybe
Yeah.
there's something in someone's some incentive plan that we're now in remuneration. We're now adding that in that to align the teams. I've seen that work really well.
Yep.
So I just think it doesn't have to be a wholesale change. And I think, as you said, if someone does the MRI, it's not like they'll get zero for all 8 areas, for example.
No.
They're usually going to be strong in probably 50, 60% of them, but there'll be a couple that'll stand out. And I think that's the important thing to remember is you're actually probably doing really well. In fact, if you listen to this podcast and you're actually doing MRI, you're definitely on the right track because you're interested.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it won't be a disaster at all. You've probably rarely ever seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no. I think, look, we, you know, every business has the opportunity to make some incremental change around this.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, coming back to, you know, why are some people sort of, you know, it's not natural to them. I think part of it is that we get, you know, we have certain things that we really engage with and we really love. And sometimes that's, you know, a process, or it's, you know, in your father's instance, he
Mm.
loved the engines and the work that he did around that.
Yeah.
And so in some ways he kind of would see customers maybe as a bit of a distraction to that, right? It was kind of, you know, this is what I'm about. And okay, customers are sort of a necessary evil. And I
Yes.
think, you know,
Yeah.
there's a way to help them reshape that a little bit, right? But that's their way of being, isn't it? Right. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's hard, you're not going to change that dramatically, but you're going to at least open their eyes up to a different viewpoint by saying, look, there's a different way to think about this that's beneficial. And it might not, you're not going to change him to be the most customer centric guy in the world, but he can at least sort of acknowledge the value that's being brought in different ways of interacting with customers, and how that can contribute to growth
Yeah.
and so on. And, you know, the MRI is really designed in many ways. I mean, it's quite an analytical tool, right? So we've
Mm.
got these behaviors. We've looked at how a difference in the the existence of these behaviors at different levels drives profitability and business performance, right?
Yeah.
So we did this study to look at that, and it's very, very clear. It's proven that those companies that drive their behavior up are more profitable organizations.
I
And I
love
think
that link, because you've gone to a really good extent to your data analytics. You talked about that earlier, but I really like the way you, at each one of these initiatives through the book, you talk about the
Yep.
behavior and its impact on strategy and its impact on business performance. And so I love the fact that I could put this book in front of anyone who could really push it as hard as they wanted, and they're going to come up with correlations that are
Yeah.
clearly there.
Yeah. And I think one thing that comes up that people get a bit worried about, right? One of the fears is, well, I can't be too customer centric because I'm just going to give everything away, right? And
Right.
actually, that's actually not what customer centricity is, because it is actually a way of delivering more value to customers in a way that's more profitable to the company, right? So that's really what the core of it is.
Yeah.
It's not doing everything for every customer, and there's some discipline around that,
Yes.
around boundaries and what you offer and what you don't.
Yeah. An ideal customer profile.
Yeah,
But
this is
also,
right.
Chris, as you and I know, we don't want our best suppliers to not be profitable and to disappear out of business. We don't want Amazon to go broke. I mean,
No.
it's unbelievable what it does for it. Your preferred plumber or tradie that you've got. I want them to be successful and profitable, so they're there next year when I call them, they can come down. I don't want to have to find another one. So
No.
I think at the core, we actually do get that. We want people to. We want value is really what we're talking about. We want value from the transaction, and it's value to us from that. So I think that's a really interesting point as well. That's not what we're talking about, is it?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's where there can be confusion around it, right?
Right.
But
So I'm loving the MRI. There's so much great stuff we could talk about for a few more hours, Chris. Where do people find out more about market culture and more about the MRI?
Yeah, so I think a great place to start is with the book, obviously. So the book kind of outlines sort of what the methodology is and what our experience has been in using it with actual businesses to create change.
Yep.
And then, I've got a blog and the Market Culture website that's got a bit more information for those that are interested in that. And then finally, the MRI Benchmark. We've got a new website now, and something that we spent the last 12 months on was really thinking about how do we actually put this in the hands of more people?
How do we scale it, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. How do we scale it? How do we make it available to more people? Because it's been really part of a consulting process that we've been engaged in for many years. But now we want to open that up and make that available to people that want to be able to do this on their own, which, there's certainly businesses that have that desire. And so it's now an application online that people can log into, they can deploy themselves, so they can send out the assessment, get the data back. There's a bunch of best practices, there's some training, there's all sorts of online materials that we've developed to help them. And so that's now it's now available as of now, really, as of right now. And it's exciting for us to go to market with something that's a little bit different to what we've done in the past.
Yeah.
So.
Welcome to the world of SaaS.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a different world, right? But
well, we'll have all those. We'll have, just for those listening, we'll have all the websites and those contact details in the show notes. So just look out for those when the podcast comes out. You'll see all the contacts for Chris, and also all the links for the MRI and market culture as well. So we'll put all those in those. Hey, Chris, been fantastic catching up. Been a long time. And really enjoyed the chat and the customer centricity, the stories on leadership. As I said, it's a great book. The customer culture imperative, again, is the name of the book. I think it's a great place to start, like you said. That alongside your blogging regularly, you do some really good stuff. So do sign up to, if you do subscribe to Chris's work, you'll get some amazing blogs and information. It's really stimulating as well. But mate, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Rob, and it's a great pleasure. It's always fun to catch up and chat.
Good to see you. Thanks, Chris.
All right, mate.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the It's All Possible podcast. You can contact me at rob@robhartnett.com or my website, robhartnett.com, or on LinkedIn. Remember to check out the previous seasons and episodes of the podcast and the show notes for more details on this episode's guest. For more inspiration, remember to check out the It's All Possibility playlist on Spotify, which contains a collection of upbeat positive music I use for inspiration in my live performances. Until next time, live with passion and a perspective of possibility.